Welcome to episode 6 of Fully Disclosed Podcast. I'm Brad Lose, and today's episode features local psychics Susan Smith and Kathleen Stillings to talk about Sacred Journey. If anyone is interested in anything that these two wonderful ladies have to say, they can look at their website, which is journeyintopower.com. That's journeyintopower.com. So, again, we still don't quite have our theme music ready here yet, so to lead you into today's episode, I chose music from Star Fox 64. So sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Susan Smith and Kathy Stillings. Because I think people have many misconceptions on when they hear the word psychic, what that means. So what exactly is a psychic? What does that term mean?
That's a very loaded question.
Well, yeah.
I think that everyone is psychic, to tell you the truth. All of us have.
Another question.
Yes, I think that everyone has psychic ability to some extent or another. Some of us, however, are a little more perhaps open to the stimulus that opens up our psychic ability. It's just like everybody can pick up a paintbrush and paint a painting, but not everyone is a Picasso.
Exactly.
And it's the same sort of idea. We're all born with certain traits. Mm-hmm. And for some reason, mine were very much at the surface. So I was able to begin working in the psychic realms really from a very early age, although I didn't know that's what I was doing when I was quite young. But a psychic is an individual who accesses information in the energetic realm that really is available to everyone, but not everyone chooses to access it. And I get that information and bring it back for my clients, for people who ask me questions, for able to give them information that's going to help them in their decision-making process, help them in their lives. That's my whole point.
Okay. What exactly is like a typical, when someone would call themselves, they would have a psychic ability? What are some of the typical abilities that people would be talking about?
Well, for example, in my case, I'm very visually oriented.
Okay.
I see things, and I put "see" in air quotes because I don't see it with my eyes. I see it with my third eye. Okay. And it's really interesting because what happens, and it's actually started before you got here this evening, I noticed that my nose started running, and that's a sure sign for me that my third eye is opening up, because what happens is it presses on my sinuses, and my sinuses drain to make room for the energy that is represented by my third eye. That's the third eye chakra. I don't know if you're familiar with the chakra system.
Because I have a friend who runs a shop she's just getting ready to open a shop in Lewisburg that deals a lot with the crystals. I do know a good bit about the chakras and at least trying to align them, and a little bit how the crystals work. So I do know a little bit of background on that.
So for me, I use things like numerology, like the tarot. I started out reading hands and doing hand analysis. All of those things are merely tools to access the information. They aren't the information itself. So when someone does a tarot spread for you, the tarot cards don't hold the information. They hold the key to the information in a metaphoric language. And it's the psychic's job, so to speak, to decode that language and put it into words that are understandable for the question that might have been asked.
So a psychic is an interpreter, more or less.
Well, an interpreter, that's one way of describing it, because the information in the energetic realm, by my experience, is I usually access it, and it's visual. And so I take what I see visually and bring it back and put it into a language that my client can understand. But can I give you an example of that?
Absolutely.
This is one of my favorite examples.
Talk about whatever you want.
I was working with a client in Sedona, Arizona. And she had come to me for a reading, and I was going on and on. And as I was talking to her, I kept seeing this big orange, like, sun sitting over her shoulder. And so I asked her, well, are you planning a trip to the Bahamas? Are you thinking of going to Hawaii? I see, we were already in a sunny location in Sedona, Arizona. I said, but I see you in a very sunny environment. There's something about the sun. And she kept going, no. In fact, she says, I'm kind of allergic to the sun. I have to wear wide-brimmed hats and everything because the sun gives me allergy reactions.
Right.
And so I couldn't figure out why I kept seeing this big orange circle. And finally it dawned on me, because I was having trouble interpreting it. I finally got why I was seeing that. And I looked at her and I said, are you lactose intolerant? And she looked at me and she said, I don't think so. And I said, well, do you like cheese? And she said, oh, I love cheese. I eat it all the time. It's just, I have cheese with everything. What I was seeing was not the sun, but a big wheel of Wisconsin cheddar cheese. And in fact, she was lactose intolerant. And she wasn't aware of it, but she was having health issues. And so once I figured out what it was that I was seeing, because it was in fact coded for me, I decoded it for her, and basically the reading was over, because the issues that she had brought to the reading were all resolved when we addressed her health issues with being lactose intolerant. And it all came from seeing that wheel of Wisconsin cheese sitting over her shoulder.
Okay. So at what age did you first have, like, the knowledge that this is what you were doing? I guess become aware of.
Oh, that's okay. I think that my first experience actually happened back in, let me see, when Kennedy was running, John Kennedy was running for president, which would have been 1960.
Yeah.
And I grew up Roman Catholic, and so I was in church, and the priest was giving a sermon about how John Kennedy was a Catholic. There'd never been a Catholic president. It was a huge,
a cult almost.
Oh my gosh, it was a huge political issue. And so we had to pray for John Kennedy.
Right.
And I'm sitting there in church and I'm thinking, wait a minute. Why do we have to do this? He's going to win. And I knew back in that summer of 1960, before anyone ever voted, that John Kennedy was going to, I think it was the summer, in any case, he was running. And I knew that he was going to win. And I was 12 years old. And I thought, this is ridiculous. Why are we sitting here praying for someone who has already won the election? Because I saw him as president. So I think that was my first conscious experience. Although I didn't know and wouldn't have thought to call it.
The certainty was so sure that if it had gone another way, would it have? Oh,
but I knew it wasn't going to.
But you knew it was so
I just
sure.
Knew.
Yeah.
In fact, because that's one of the reasons why until President Obama ran for office, actually, when Hillary Clinton was running in the primaries, I never voted because I always knew who was going to win.
Right.
Especially the bigger elections. Sometimes the local elections, there was just too much interference, perhaps, and I couldn't quite push away the chaff to figure out who was going to win. But for the presidential elections, I always knew.
Yeah.
Always knew who was going to win.
Do you even know, like, in 2000, did the Florida thing, was it Gore? Was Gore supposed to win?
You know what? You put your finger on one of the reasons why I now vote, because in the Bush-Gore election, that was the first time ever I couldn't figure out who was going to win. And looking back on it now, I suspect that the reason that I couldn't figure out who was going to win was because the nation couldn't figure out.
Okay.
It was just such a mishmash of all kinds of people putting their hands in things, with Nader running in Florida, kind of splitting the Democratic vote, and then the Supreme Court getting involved. I just frankly couldn't see it. That was the first one since John Kennedy ran that I couldn't figure out.
And then, since what age then did you say, like, I have something maybe a little more than what most people have? Like, I have a special ability.
That's interesting. I suspect it happened after I quit teaching. And I taught kindergarten from 1970 to 1975. And in 1975, the woman I had done my student teaching with
Okay.
who was a fabulous teacher, Sarah Williams. I'll never forget her. She retired after teaching first grade for 42 years. Now, I was in my 5th year of kindergarten, and all I could think of was, I can't do this for another 37 years.
Yeah.
I just really can't. And so I resigned, and I moved to California.
Okay.
And I lived in San Francisco for 15 years. And it was there that I really began exploring the metaphysical world. It was at that time much more open to alternative ways of looking at the world. Whereas here in Pennsylvania, it was kind of conservative, I guess you could
we're a
say.
very closed-minded area.
Hello, you said that, I didn't.
Yes.
but in
Yes.
fact, that was probably the case, especially back in 1975.
Mhm.
And I had gotten a book at a book fair on numerology, and I like numbers, and I still do numerology, and I teach it as well. And in the back of the numerology book, they referenced a book on palmistry, and I got it, and I was hooked. And I spent and have spent ever since that time, which was probably 1975, early 76. I consider myself a hand analyst, first and foremost. I love reading people's hands. I find them like roadmaps to our lives, the lines in our hands. And I don't just read the lines, I read the fingernails and the fingers and the wrists and the mounds. It's a very complex art.
Right.
And I'm still learning. I have 50, 60 books on palmistry, and I still consult them. So it's not a dead, closed system. Psychic ability is an open-ended system, and there's always something new to explore and find out.
Well, even like a priest or a pastor or a leader of a church says that they're not perfect. They're still trying to increase their communication with God, as it would be with a psychic. I would assume they're still further increasing their abilities the more they do it.
I suspect you're correct.
Yeah,
I actually have a brother who's a priest, and I admire him tremendously.
Mm-hmm.
And he is very open and honest about the work that I do, and is encouraging
Right.
as far as that goes, understanding that there are many paths to reach the all that is, or God, or Allah, or Buddha, or however
Right,
you want to refer to a supreme power.
Mhm.
And
Whatever you name
I'm
it.
just on another path.
It.
You're
The deity.
you're being politically correct.
Right.
Very good.
So actually, that brings me to a very interesting question, because when you sent me an email and you said you had named a couple different types of people that you have done readings for, and there were two in particular that stuck out to me as very interesting, and that was the nun and the priest. And the reason that stuck out to me as interesting is because I would have thought what you do would be considered in there as witchcraft. You know what I mean? And I know that's an ignorant stance, but that's just from an outsider looking in, because I thought people were like burned at the stake back in the day doing stuff like
We
this.
were.
You know what I mean?
We were. It's actually not an ignorant question. It's a very astute question.
Okay.
The organized religion, whether it's Catholicism, whether it's Judaism or Buddhism or Islam, all of those isms, so to speak, tend to be very controlling of their congregations, and they are controlled through fear.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not I was about to say I'm not a fearful person, but there are some things that can be very scary. The task is to move through it, even though you are frightened. So in my case, working with, and the priest that I read actually was not my brother. This was when I was out in the Southwest, and I read a number of nuns, some who are still in their service to the Lord, and some who have left the convent and come back into public life. And in most of those cases, let me tell you about one of the nuns that I read, because I don't know how much you know about Catholicism.
A good bit.
Okay.
You're fine. Keep going. Because
Our
listeners don't know. So.
You sound like a fully recovered Catholic, which is how I refer to myself.
Lutheran.
Okay.
Close enough.
Close enough. When a nun takes her vows, she puts on a wedding ring and she's married to Christ, okay? And one of the women I read, this was when I was living out in Chama, New Mexico. A client came had made an appointment, and I didn't know she was a nun at the time that I was reading her when the reading started. And there's something about the lifeline in people and how it progresses. The lifeline is the line that starts in this little arch between the index and the thumb and curls around the thumb.
Right.
And the further away that line is away from the thumb, the broader one's life is. The more out into the world a person goes. The closer that line is to the thumb, the more restricted life. Okay. And I looked at her lifeline, and it was just very, very restricted. And the first thing because the lifeline's usually the first thing that I read.
Right.
I looked at her and I said, well, my sense about you is that it looks as if you had a somewhat restricted life. And if that's not the case, then perhaps even when you were a little girl, you might have wanted to be a nun or lived a religious life of some kind, because I see you as having moved away from the world. And it was at that point that she looked up at me and she said, you're right, I'm a nun. Yeah. And then the reading progressed on because there were issues and things that she wanted to know. But the fact that she was a nun, or that the individuals that I read who were priests, they were nuns and priests and or archaeologists and or accountants second. They were human beings first.
Exactly.
And it was the human side of them that, in fact, I would guess all of my clients who have issues that they want clarification on, who have questions and they don't know how to resolve them, and perhaps the more logical ways that one would assume to get answers, going to a counselor, going to a priest or a rabbi, hadn't worked for them. And so someone said, well, have you called Susan?
Yeah.
And honestly, I don't ever advertise. The only way I get clients and the only way I have for my whole career has been through referrals.
Right.
And I've been reading some people for 10, 15, 20 years because they know they can trust me to look at their situation honestly and give them the best advice that I can find for them. And I wanted to say this at the beginning and I forgot. When I tell you a story about a client that I've had or a reading or something that went on, my motto is what happens at 2235 stays at 2235.
I would imagine it'd be much like a HIPAA thing to a psychic, to be perfectly honest, because it's very personal experience. So
when I tell you a story about something that happened in a reading, it's because I have asked them. It's because something about their particular reading was so unusual or so unique that because I teach and because I give talks, I felt that I might want to share that information. And you know, the interesting thing, Brad, is that I have never, ever had someone say no. In fact, I have people who have said, oh, give them my phone number. I'll tell you know, they're so, I love people. They're so open and generous about their lives and about wanting to help other people.
Well, I would also imagine most people who would be open-minded enough to come to you in the first place would generally be open-minded enough to allow other people
That has always been the case. I've never had anyone say no.
That's right.
And what I usually do is, like, I might change the location. Like I told you that I read The Nun in Chama, New Mexico, but it might have been in Sedona. It could have been out in California.
Exactly.
It's not important where it was.
No, it doesn't change the story.
Exactly.
And that's the same way when people, when they read things that are supposed to be moral, metaphorical lessons, such as the different various Bibles of the various religions, they're supposed to be metaphorical, moral teachings, and they read them literally. You don't need to have the literal there to get the morality out of the book.
And that's kind of fascinating because I suspect when they were written a few thousand years ago, they could have been taken literally.
Right.
Especially, I think, some of the Hebraic laws about mixing milk and meat and keeping kosher.
There
that was for health.
For that, yeah.
They're actually very beautiful ceremonially, but not really applicable in the 21st century.
Right.
However, if they make people feel good, if they give them a purpose for their lives, who am I to say they ought not to do it?
I've always just been, I guess, in favor of getting rid of isms. I've never been a big believer in the organization of things in general, simply because I think when somebody has too much power over something such as your afterlife, your soul, like this is the person you're following to get to your ultimate goal, that's a lot of power and trust to put in an individual who is ultimately the head of that organization.
I don't disagree with you. I'd like to maybe add a little bit something to that. My sense is that a lot of people don't want to make the decisions themselves. So if they are in a dogmatic ism, as you called it,
right,
that will make the decisions for them. They give over their personal freedom, so they don't have to make the choices.
It's easier not to make a choice.
And the other aspect of that is that there are in this world many things that can cause fear, that can make people frightened, and a lot of these organizations control their people through fear.
Right.
You will go to hell unless you wear your hair this way, unless you wear this kind of clothing, unless you do this, and don't eat meat on Friday, and on and on and on. And again, there are individuals who need that.
Yes.
However, there are many, and particularly moving now into the 21st century pretty strongly, there are a lot of people for whom that no longer works.
Right.
And so that's one of the things that my business partner Kathy and I are working on, is to establish something that meets the needs of individuals who have moved beyond, as you call them, the isms.
Right. Right, which I think actually is a majority of my generation, to be perfectly honest. I think we've grown up in a stringent. A lot of us grew up in a household of an ism, and we came together, and I think a lot more isms than there used to be. So when we got to school and stuff, and we all met each other's isms, and we all started talking, I think we all found that we didn't like the specific one we were in, and they were all kind of the same, but just a little bit different, and we never really fit in with any of them, I think is what a lot of my generation feels.
And what I hear you describing is something that I've felt for a long time. I suspect that a lot of these individual little, and some of them are quite big, religious sects, I don't know quite how else to refer to them, have a legitimate piece of the puzzle.
Denominations, like.
Yes, that's a great word. Yes, that actually fits. They do have a piece of the puzzle, but they don't have the whole puzzle. They act as if they have the whole puzzle. And if we can put all of those disparate pieces together, I think we might really have something.
Right.
The difficulty is that so many of them have what I call tunnel vision. It's their way or the highway, and in Sacred Journey, one of the things that we're doing, there's one requirement to belong to Sacred Journey, and the only requirement is that you're alive.
Yeah.
You don't have to wear your hair a certain way, you don't have to dress a certain way. All you have to do is be a human being with a soul on a path.
And what exactly is Sacred Journey?
Well, let me give you a little bit of a history.
Yes.
My website is called Journey into Power, and that came into being back in 2005 when I moved here from the Southwest. When I moved back home, I grew up here in Williamsport.
Right.
And I established the website Journey into Power, and always about what things that I was doing. And this past April, Kathy came back from a seminar that she took in England on sacred geometry.
Yep.
Kathy was a student of mine at the time. We were working on a number of different things, the tarot and a number of other ways of accessing the energetic realm. And she was very excited about this sacred geometry.
Yes.
And we tried to figure out how we could combine her interest in sacred geometry with my journey into power, which is about a spiritual path. And we came up with Sacred Journey, which is kind of how it was born. And then, amazingly enough, Kathy was on her way to visit a friend, and normally she took a route that got her to her friend's home in a relatively quick fashion. And for some reason, one day, she took a different route, and she went by we refer to it as 2570. She went by 2570, and she actually stopped and pulled in, and she thought, this is Sacred Journey. And what it was a church that had been decommissioned, I guess it's called, and it was empty, and it was for sale. So she called me up and told me about it, and I thought, well, that's neat. And the next time that she was here in class, instead of coming in and having class, which we have at this table, as a matter of fact, I went out and met her, and I said, okay, road trip.
Yeah.
And we got in her car and we drove over there, and we doused it with a pendulum, and Kathy had her dowsing rods there, so we doused it with her dowsing rods. We walked all around it. We looked in the windows, and it was perfect. It had meeting rooms so that practitioners could have their massage classes, their yoga classes, their counseling, if that's what they wanted to do. It had a huge meeting room, I guess, where Sunday services could be held, where yoga classes could be held. It just had everything that we wanted. So we got ourselves a realtor, and now we're working on a fundraising project through Indiegogo to raise the money to purchase it.
Okay.
And then have a home for Sacred Journey, because right now you're sitting at Sacred Journey's home.
Okay. Yeah.
This is where Sacred Journey lives at the moment.
So then what are the fundamental beliefs of Sacred Journey? Are there any, or are they self-found?
I think belief is a loaded word.
Okay.
My sense, and when I said earlier that the only criteria for belonging to Sacred Journey is being alive, being a human being.
So not a corporation, though, right?
Well, we're actually going, because of we live in the real world. We live here in the third dimension, and because of that, we're going to be establishing a 501c3 nonprofit corporation.
Okay.
And we're working on that right now. And that's just because, first of all, we're in an ex-church, assuming we get the property. Right. And Sacred Journey is about a spiritual path that a person takes. And our sense is that there are many different ways of getting to nirvana, heaven, however you want to describe it. I call it New York. Seriously. And no matter where you are, you can get to New York. Now, here we are in Williamsport, and we could head on down to Tampa, Florida, and then out to New Mexico, and then up to Canada, and then end up down in New York. That's one path. We could just get on the train and go right up to New York.
Right.
We could go across the Atlantic, take one of those ocean liners over the Atlantic, go to London, see Paris, then get on a plane, take the polar route, and fly into JFK, and we get back to New York. All of those are legitimate ways of getting to New York.
Okay.
I firmly believe that there are many, many paths.
Right.
And our task is to honor and respect all paths, to share the information that we have about those paths, and to celebrate our humanity. Okay. And I suspect that's, in a nutshell, what Sacred Journey is.
I actually love that idea. So, but the idea of sacred geometry, I did look up a little bit into this. So, Kathy, I know this is your area. But I'm actually very interested in the idea of sacred geometry, because as a bit of a mathematician, I'm in college for biology and chemistry. I'm a very logic and shape math-oriented guy. So the idea that math and shapes make up everything, I guess, in the universe, is that the idea of sacred geometry, or could you explain it maybe a little more?
Before Kathy starts, I'll just say this.
Yeah.
Kathy and I talk about we're being mirror images of each other, because I'm the word person, and I'm very good at images, and Kathy is the number person, and she's very good at that engineering side of things. So she's the person who devised our icon for our that represents Sacred Journey. So anyhow. Now, this is Kathy Stillings, by the way.
Everything that surrounds us in nature, in construction, in engineering, if you will, if you study engineering like I've studied engineering, the basis of all of that, and in what I found in my connection with nature too, which joined everything together besides the engineering aspect, is what they call the perfect mean, the perfect ratio. Our bodies are designed perfectly. They're from the ratio perspectively, we're designed in that perfect ratio. And with the grand scheme of things, when you look at geometry, the very basis of the sacred geometry is what they call your basic forms.
Okay.
Your triangle, your square, your rectangle. They're all proportional, and everything is proportional. So we've got what we call the golden mean, and in that is the perfect proportion, of which if you see like the size of our legs, our arms, and how we reach outward, and the span of our physical being is perfectly proportional. You take a look at what I think are some of the excellent representation of sacred geometry. The seeds growing in a sunflower.
Okay.
Look at the form of a hermit crab shell. When you look at those details and you look at that formation, a pine cone from a pine tree, being out here in Pennsylvania, you've got lots of things to choose. In that respect, you've got that perfect ratio, that perfect form.
Now, where did the perfect ratio come from? When was the perfect ratio decided?
Well, it wasn't decided. It was studied. It's studied by mathematicians. Yeah, mathematicians and scientists. And it goes back to Fibonacci. It goes back to before those times. It goes back to ancient Egypt times. It goes back to how we balance everything that we work with. Everything is in balance. As above, so below. And in that balance, and it's all part of what we call ratio in the engineering world and the mechanical world of doing things. It's how we balance everything out. And it's all done in ratios.
And I did see here, like, some of the Hindu, I guess in what is it, the Manasara and the Silpasara? I'm sorry if I'm butchering those names. I don't know if you know them, but I guess in even those books, they said that they quote, they have specific dimensions and shapes for how their buildings of worship and I guess like their obelisks and stuff are supposed to be made.
Absolutely.
And is that in keeping with this idea, or was that separate?
That's in keeping with that idea. To my knowledge, and what I've learned about their practice is in keeping with that perfect balance. And in order for them to be in a dwelling that houses their persona, if you will, the physical nature of themselves, there has to be that perfect balance. And all of that does root back to sacred geometry, which could go on and on and on.
And I saw too, I think it was Pythagoras who was talking about music and the idea of harmonic ratios.
Boy, you hit it right on the head. She's a musician. She started out.
So I did see, I saw on your website you do drum circles now. You started leading drum circles in the area. What exactly does a drum circle do to harmonize our body?
The drum circle, and my work has led me towards sound healing, if you will. It's the vibrational harmonics of it. And in that, it feeds off of sacred geometry, if you will, because it's all mathematics.
Right.
And if you get down to the core of the mathematics of music and delve into it to that point, I could definitely bore you with all the details.
Right.
But I'm going to take it to a different level. When it comes to the sound healing work that is done, it's vibrational. And it works with the core of ourselves. It works with how we're made up, our DNA, and the mathematical structure of that too ties into that.
Well, everything vibrates on its own frequency.
On its own frequency, and it's based on frequency, and it's based on harmonics. So in the drum circles that I do, the intent of the drum circles is that vibrational feeling, where I have had people tell me that I have walked into this drum circle with a headache and a backache and I'm just had a terrible day, and at the end of the drum circle they're sitting there and they're saying, oh my God, their mouth is wide open, and they can't believe the transformation in their physical being. And that's part of the vibrational aspect of it, the harmonics. If we were to measure it in sine waves, if we were to measure it in you know, in the mathematical world, you could actually see the impact that it does have on our physical being.
Right. Does somebody have to be open to it for it to work for them?
No, I'm actually, I chuckled only because I know that there's people that have
That's usually one of the common skeptics' claim, is that the reason it works for people is because they're open to it.
And I've actually had skeptics come to sound healing and to drum circles in the work that I've done specifically to see how that impacts them.
Yeah.
And it's an extension of what we're doing with Sacred Journey. It's an absolute extension of that. And they and I've not had one of them that's not been transformed walking out in some little way.
Well, I think music sound in particular, I think, touches people in a particular way. It can evoke such emotion where you don't even know what the emotion of somebody who was writing this piece of music or playing what it was, but you do know just from the way you're hearing it, because you're not just hearing it. These are pressure waves. They're concussion waves. It's moving air. So you're not just hearing it, you're feeling it, too.
Well, it's more than moving air.
Yeah.
It's more than moving air, because if you take a look at the resonance of the vibration, there is a resonance that exists. And the analogy that I give to people is if you take a drop of water and you drop that drop of water into a lake, and the resonance of that expounds outward, that's the actual resonance that you get in your physical body, because we're made of water.
Right, and exactly. And you can even see there have been people who have used sound as weapons throughout the past, too. Our Navy just used it to take down some pirates here a couple of years ago because it's a very good non-lethal weapon. And if you look at the Old Testament, they tell, with the Ark of the Covenant, the Jews were to walk around Jericho, I believe it was 14 times or something like that. And each time they walked around, they were supposed to blow these horns. And on the last time they walked around, they blew these horns, and the walls of Jericho came tumbling down.
And interestingly enough, Susan, as my teacher, as her student, we've discussed the sound vibration that dates back to even the pyramids of Egypt. We've had pretty in-depth discussions with respect to the power of that vibration.
Right. Something that I think people still feel today, that people were feeling thousands of, like, at the beginning of human civilization, that there has to be something said for that. There has to be at least a little bit of credence to that. Otherwise, it would have been forgotten about and tossed aside along with all of our other old beliefs, like the Earth being the center of the universe, that kind of deal.
You know, one of the things that Kathy, with her engineering side, was tasked with coming up with a symbol that represented Sacred Journey.
Right.
And what when she presented her when she presented her work, I kept going, no, it's too complicated. It's too complicated. And, you know, it was beautiful, but, you know, if you think about Christianity, there's the cross. If you think about Judaism, there's the Star of David. And we needed something very simple. And then so finally she goes back, and there's this octahedron. Which is simply two pyramids, one on top of the other, which takes us right back to what you were talking about, ancient civilizations, and brings it right up to modern.
Everything comes down into triangles. Even circles you can kind of break down into triangles, just flipped all around in a circle.
Oh, and that's all about finding the pivot points. Absolutely, absolutely.
Now I want to get into something that I'm really interested in. That's the different forms of the psychic arts, because I'm extremely new to these. So all I have are like what I found on the internet, you know, like Wikipedia entries and stuff. So the first thing is dowsing, and you talked about this a little bit. And what I had read, you know, they have these do-it-yourself, you know, dowsing things online where you can print out these little paper sheets with the arcs on them, and you hold the pendulum in your fingers and you do this. can somebody do that to themselves, or do you need somebody there to interpret what's happening, an outside influence?
You have a chain around your neck. Can you pull it
Yes.
out? Is there something on it?
It's my wedding ring.
Okay, take it off.
Okay.
And may I use it?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to show you how to dowse with a pendulum.
Okay.
This is Susan, and I'd like to use this as a pendulum. Is it okay if I do so? Now, Brad doesn't know. Will you please show me a yes answer? You see how it's swinging?
Mhm.
Okay. Will you please show me a no answer? Thank you. I just want to ask some questions about the psychic arts. Is it okay if I do that? Okay. Brad's really interested in these kinds of things. Do you think, is it possible that Brad would be able to dowse? So if we gave Brad this necklace, would he be able to use it to dowse with? Okay, fine. Now I want you to notice how I'm holding it. I've got the chain between my fingers
Okay.
and like this, and I'm not pressing on it, it's just kind of resting there.
Okay.
So you take it. That's fine.
Like that?
And then the first thing you want to do is ask it to please show you a yes answer.
All right. So do I need to stop it here like
Well,
that?
yeah, you can just,
Okay.
that's,
Can you please show me a yes answer? All right. I guess it's swinging forward and back to me there a little bit.
okay. And please show Brad a no answer. Please show Brad what no looks like for him.
Oh, there it is swinging side to
Yeah,
side.
and you're not swinging it, are you?
No, no.
Okay, now here's the interesting thing. For some people, and my mother actually taught me how to dowse when I was a little kid. She would get out her sewing basket, and while she was sewing, she would take a piece of thread and attach a button to it, just the way we've got this here, and then she would ask questions. And she said, it would never work for me. And she said, well, I guess you just can't dowse. But
Right.
what was happening was, for my mother, clockwise was yes, and counterclockwise was no. And
So
for
it's
me,
different
you
for
saw,
everybody.
yeah, so that's why you ask the energy to please show you a yes answer, and then please show you a no answer.
You know, it's funny. It was the same for you and me. So is it that our energies are the same, or is
No,
the
it's
energy
just how
of this
it's just
pendulum?
how it's coming through us.
Okay.
Some people, this way is yes and this way is no.
Right.
It just depends. That's why you always ask.
Okay.
And if it goes in a circle, for me, that means,
Now, what kind of things could I ask?
okay, I know that you're married.
Right.
Okay. So you might want to ask, am I going to have any children?
Okay.
How many children am I going to have?
All right.
Will I have one child? Will I have two children? Okay, go ahead.
Am I going to have any children?
Oh, it's swinging no right now. However, there is oftentimes when we use any of the psychic arts where there is interference. I'm going to take this off your hands a minute to show you.
Okay.
One of the things that you might want to ask is there any interference while I'm asking questions? And you see how it's swinging yes?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I'd like to clear the interference, please. And then you swing it and clear the interference.
Okay.
And then we ask, is there any interference now as I'm asking questions? And we got to know.
Okay.
Okay, then there's another set of questions that you ask.
All
And
right.
you ask, I want to be sure that I'm connected to a good energy that's going to give me accurate answers.
Okay.
And it's going yes. Now, but you want to ask that too. You want to be sure that in fact, you might want to say, this is Brad, and I want to ask some questions about whether or not my wife and I are going to have children. Am I connected to a good energy that's going to give me accurate answers?
Okay.
You see how that goes?
Yeah. All right. Let's give that a shot here. Just like that. Hi, I'm Brad, and I want to make sure I'm connected to a good energy that's going to give me accurate answers. That's
Delicate
yes.
little yes.
Yeah.
Okay, go
Okay.
ahead.
Am I going to have any children? Another delicate little yes. So now, it can only be yes or no
Yes
questions?
or no, so you can
All
ask,
right.
am I going to have one child?
Am I going to have
two
one
children?
kid? No. Oh, that was quick. Am I going to have two kids? That looks like a yes. to
Looks
me.
like a yes to me too.
Well, no, that's interesting.
Now,
So-
put that back on and I'll show you something else.
Okay. Douse, like I'm dousing again?
No.
Oh, put it back.
Put it on.
Okay.
That's dowsing. You've had a quick lesson in dowsing.
Okay.
Now, are you right-handed or left-handed?
I'm right-handed.
Okay. So,
Fairly ambidextrous, but mostly right-handed.
where are you? Like Gemini?
No, actually, my sister is, though, I believe, and she's really weird with her ambidextrous.
Okay. This is a quick, here's your lifeline, by the way.
Okay, yeah.
You always read both hands, but in this case, we can read for children. This is your heart line,
Okay.
and this is the,
And
this,
for anybody, because nobody can see us right now, she's reading my palm right now, which is actually going off the dowsing thing, because that's fun. I wanted to ask about palmistry, too.
okay. So from your heart line up to your little finger is 90 years. Just like on your fate line, from here, from your wrist up to the start of your middle finger, that's 90 years. So we have to scale depending on what we're asking about. So here, from here to here is 90 years. And then we look for lines moving in this direction, horizontally across your hand, to see how many marriages you have. And you have one really, really strong marriage right here. And interestingly enough, here's 2 children. Look, you can see them. 1, 2. Children coming up this way. See?
Yeah.
1, 2.
Let's see what
The way, just to give you a better idea,
Yeah.
marriage lines go like this, as we showed you, and then
Okay.
children's lines go like this. Girl lines tend to be slanted because the feminine is receptive,
Okay.
and male lines tend to be straight up because the male energy is thrusting. Back starting in the 1980s, I noticed that I couldn't tell whether a child was going to be a girl or a boy, because souls began to come onto the planet manifesting as males, but needing to learn lessons about their emotions.
Would that explain the newer trend of the transgendered people that,
You know, I don't.
like the soul trapped almost in the opposite sex body, that these people feel, I am a girl, but they're a boy. You know what I mean?
That's really an interesting topic, and I haven't really explored it enough to give you a really insightful answer.
Yeah.
To my knowledge, I have never had any transgender clients, so
Okay.
I really can't, I don't want to address that.
Yeah.
I haven't explored it enough to give you a good answer.
Yeah, that's just, I was just curious because you had said about that the people were coming, what was it, different emotional? Was that what you said they were? That you couldn't, there were souls coming in that you said you couldn't read whether they were boys or girls.
Whether they
Right.
were going to be a girl or a boy. And that's because back at about 1980, 82, souls began to incarnate in the feminine as a female, but they had the task of learning how to be assertive, learning how to be equal to the masculine.
Okay.
Whereas individual souls that were manifesting as males came onto the planet to learn as a male what it is like to be more receptive, to be more open, to be more feeling.
So because we're decreasing the line between the clear gender roles, that the idea that women can...
Wow, that's a fascinating thought.
Did you
pick that up?
feminist, like the feminist movement almost, the idea that women can do what men can do, and men can also do what women can do, that we don't need this clear line to divide
And
the
that
genders
could
anymore.
that could explain a lot about individuals wanting, well, like Chastity Bono is now whatever Chastity
right,
calls.
Chaz.
Chaz is now
Yes.
Chaz. That whole complicated issue of
Right.
how our
And it's
soul
very
is manifesting.
interesting to think about, because as an empathetic person, to hear about the idea of being trapped, which I think to most people is one of the most horrifying concepts, the idea of being trapped in something, that, I don't know, I think maybe that's why we're so interested in them, because that's so scary. That's such a scary prospect, at least to me. Like, I'm extremely claustrophobic. If you would stick me in a closet or something and, like, tell me I can't get out and trap me in there, I would go nuts. Like, I would not be able to live that way, I don't think.
My sense about things like that, especially if as a young child you weren't trapped someplace, is that it could very well have its origins in another lifetime. That you experienced perhaps a cave-in. Perhaps you were 10,000 years ago living in a cave in the Alsace-Lorraine, and there was a cave-in, and you were trapped. And you're carrying that sense of claustrophobia.
That's very interesting, because my biggest fear on this planet, all right, are undiscovered ocean creatures. That I will never go on a boat that will go out past where I can see land into the ocean, simply because that's when I know the Kraken will be discovered and he will come up and take just me off of the ship. Those are the kind of fears. That's my biggest fear, and it's completely irrational.
Well, it is. You know what? This is really interesting, Brad. It's irrational if you look at it just from Brad's lifetime.
Right.
However, if you take the blinders off and possibly can conceive of the fact that over a span of 25,000 years, your soul has manifested in many different bodies, in many different continents, and in many different times. And in those various incarnations, you will have had many different experiences. And it's very possible that you were perhaps a slave in a galley, rolling and rowing and rowing and rowing, and you were rowing from, let's say, Greece over to North Africa, and there came a storm, and the ship goes topsy-turvy, and there you are in the ocean, and you're not dead, but here comes a whale or a shark or whatever, and you can't see land, you can't see Greece, you can't see Africa, and you're in the belly of the whale.
Right. You end up like Jonah, except you don't come back out.
Exactly, kind of like that. And the interesting thing is that I think that our cells contain the memories of things like that. That's why Kathy's drumming and crystal harp work so well, because at a cellular level, there's a memory of things that our conscious mind can't access but still exist.
Is it possible to, let's say, change your resonance to achieve a different plane of thought?
I don't think you have to change anything.
I mean, like, if you were to, let's say, have a certain vibration, like a certain kind of music going on around you that would help you vibrate and achieve, like, a different, you know what I mean? Like,
well,
a
that's
different
certainly
level.
possible.
Because I believe that that's a Buddhist mentality, the idea of the out-of-body experience, that you can actually leave if you achieve a certain frequency, and that's how you go to visit, like, let's say, the Buddha.
And that's certainly legitimate.
Okay.
My sense about those kinds of things is that they're tools, just like the tarot is a tool, music is a tool to help you do that. The point to remember about all of this, however, is that you don't need the drumming, you don't need the music, you don't need to sit in a cross-legged lotus position in order to achieve that access to the energetic realm. I first started doing readings in restaurants and bars, and I can see things when I choose to turn on the, and look. I can see things, and I don't need to have incense burning, and it's just
So the stereotypical like psychic that you would see on TV, that like they come up and they wander and she's there in like the mystical garb with the crystal ball and the incense burning all around her in the dimly lit
very
room.
19th century.
Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? Like that is all showmanship. You don't need any of that whatsoever.
Well, I don't.
Yes.
However, I suspect that there are individuals, both in the audience and the practitioner themselves, who require that in order to achieve whatever goals they're looking for.
So it's possible even the person coming to the psychic needs that too.
Absolutely.
That the psychic doesn't need it, but that person needs it.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
See, that's interesting.
There used to be a guy, and he may still be on TV. I think his name was John Robert.
Was it John Edwards?
John Edwards.
Who talked to the dead people, right?
The thing about John Edwards, or Edward, I'm not sure
there was a politician named John Edwards who slept with a woman and had illegitimate. This John Edwards who talked to dead people.
However, I don't think he has an S at the end of his name. I might be wrong.
I think one is Edwards and one is Edward, and I'm not sure which one is which.
John Edward, when I would watch him on television, one of the reasons that I suspect that he's truly legitimate, that he's really accessing information, is that I hear him saying things that I would say myself when I was doing a reading for someone. He might say, "There's someone here who has." I'm trying to think of an example. He would say, "Who's holding out a rose."
Right.
Now, what happens in the energetic realm when we're contacting individuals who have passed over is they will use something that has no meaning for me, or in what we're talking about, John Edward, but has meaning for someone there.
Okay.
So, for example, Men, this is just in general. Men, if someone has asked a question about a deceased relative or friend, and it's a man, they will often show themselves to me with regard to their hair. Because men are very conscious of going bald, of having too much curly hair, of growing a beard, of not growing a beard.
Yes, so, I don't care. I shaved today because my wife told me I should to come meet you.
Well, there you are. And so when they have passed over, and frankly, when they're still in the body, they will often show themselves to me via their hair. And it won't mean anything to me, so I'll say to my client, just like John Edwards said, I'm seeing someone handing me a rose, I will say to my client, I'm seeing someone, and it looks like they're going bald, but their hair is really curly. And they'll go, oh my gosh, that's my Uncle Frank.
See, now, I see a bit of a difference between you and John Edward, though, in this instance. Simply because I feel like what he does is cold reading. Simply because he's talking to a large audience. So if he says something out there like, I see somebody holding a rose, odds are somebody in that audience is going to latch onto that. And then as soon as he looks at that person and sees who it is, he can say, oh, well, this looks like, let's say it's a younger woman and she was pretty grief-stricken. There's no one here with her.
He's gotten charged with that, of doing cold readings. And perhaps the idea of the rose wasn't as powerful as it could have been.
Right.
It really doesn't delegitimize what he's doing.
Okay.
There may be a bit of what is derogatorily called cold reading.
Okay.
My sense about things like that is, as a psychic, we pick up all kinds of information in all kinds of ways. We read people.
Okay.
And so his ability to tune into whomever that rose means doesn't mean that he's doing a cold reading.
Okay.
It means that he's finding the individual for whom that rose has specific meaning.
Okay.
Okay? I watched enough of his show to think that he really has an ability.
Okay.
He really and truly does. Being in that kind of venue with a huge audience, and I've read I've done those kinds of things, and it's hard because you've got energy coming at you from all over the place. To be able to focus in on one or two individuals is a unique talent, and he's got it.
Is it maybe then an ill-advised task to try and do those kind of shows?
I don't think so. And the reason why is because what John Edward did, and I think I was watching him back in like the late 90s, early 2000s.
He was doing it for a long time.
Is that what that did was open up a door for individuals not to be afraid.
Right.
And that was a huge, huge task that he performed in that ability. Because as we started out talking this evening, everyone has psychic ability.
Right.
And some people, when it manifests in their lives, they get very, very frightened. Because, wow, what is that? Did I just see my great-grandma walk across the living room?
Interesting.
So what he did was he brought it down to earth. He made it seem okay. He made it be a manifestation that was understandable and not something to be afraid of.
Right.
If I may?
Yeah.
He also was a pioneer for the training, if you will, because there's institutes that are out there that are taking and training folks to understand the gift that they have, that mediumship that they're opening up to, and those that are willing to expand upon that and learn more about it. But they want to learn from a mentor. They want to learn in a scholastic type society. He opened that cold reading, if you will, that forum, and a lot of institutes use that to this day to hard train mediums, if you will.
Okay.
Because it's a very difficult environment to work in, and they use that as part of the curriculum, if you will.
You guys,
part of hard training.
Most mediums, psychics, fortune tellers, future seers, soothsayers, whatever term or derogatory term has been lobbed at you guys over the many thousands of years of the existence of people who've had these abilities, people generally are hostile.
Well, I don't know. I would disagree with that word. They're fearful.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I mean. Because they're afraid of what that kind of ability might mean. I think is what it is.
And their training. The most organized religions
Mm-hmm.
are totally against the kind of work that I do.
Right.
In my own family, I was visiting out in California. One of my siblings was getting married, and another sibling and I were shopping, and we're walking down Lombard Street, actually, in San Francisco, and she looked at me and she said, "Do you still do that thing you do?"
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, I do." And she goes,
Yeah.
"I don't want to know about it. I don't want to know." So fine. So I didn't talk about it. And I think it's fear related.
Yes.
That people, because you can't see it, you can't
People are
feel it,
always
you
afraid
can't
of what they
touch
don't
it.
understand.
Exactly. And many of the isms that we
Yes.
talked about earlier are very condemnatory. They
Mhm.
condemn this kind of work. When I had my office down on 4th Street, the gal that I rented from, who was just great, got calls about me. "Do you realize that one of your tenants is consorting with the devil?"
Yes. Yes.
And that comes from that evangelical, closed-minded, if you can't see it, feel it, touch it, taste it,
Right.
it doesn't exist and you're consorting with the devil.
Right.
And to her everlasting credit, she said, "No."
Yeah.
No.
Well, I do think, again, people are afraid of what they don't understand. And what you do, because there are people like the Aleister Crowleys out there who people have accused of, these are people associating with the devil, and like they're following I believe it was called a left-handed path, was what I read about.
If they were just going to New York in another direction.
Okay.
That's all.
Yep. So, do you believe in the idea that there is Satanism?
No, there isn't. No,
Okay.
I traveled out into the energetic realm thousands of times over these past almost 40 years now, and I have never once seen anything to be afraid of, to be cautioned about, to
Right.
be fearful. At the energetic realm, the catchword, the watchword, if you will, is love.
Right.
The idea of
Right.
hell, of the devil, of Satan, is a product of this third dimension. And it was a tool, and still is a tool, used to keep people in control.
Yes. Absolutely.
That's absolutely all that it's about.
I agree.
And some people, frankly, probably still need that.
What better thing to sell somebody than an invisible product?
Here's the interesting thing is that we get addicted to fear. One of my bugaboos, if you will, is the kinds of movies that deliberately work to make people frightened, to
Yes.
scare them.
Yes.
And the difficulty with that is that those scary movies set up a fear reaction that causes adrenaline to be released in the body.
Yes.
And over time, these individuals who are fans of this genre
Mhm.
become addicted to it, and
Yes,
they need more and more fearful,
Absolutely.
scary things in order for that adrenaline reaction to happen. And it's the same with the devil. It's merely a creation of this dimension to scare people into doing something a certain way. There's no hell. If there's
Right.
a hell at all, it's right here.
Right.
And we created
isn't that, I believe that's actually the Jewish tradition, is that's what they believe actually, is I believe they think this is hell, that after this we go to heaven. There's nothing else but heaven after this. That's the only afterlife.
Unless you consider the fact that we live multiple lifetimes, and then
Right.
we just keep coming back and getting better and better. My sense is like, for example, Mother Teresa or the Dalai Lama, those individuals don't come back manifesting that kind of pure lifetime unless they have already gone through a series of lifetimes where they were a thief, where they were a
Right.
murderer. Then maybe they were a father or a mother and a sister and a brother. Over the span of our incarnational cycle, participate in many, many different lifetimes. And then we get to come back, and I think by choice, as the spiritual leaders, as political leaders.
Right.
I'll tell you who's fascinated me my whole life is Adolf Hitler.
Okay.
And the reason why is
Fascinated a lot of people.
fascinating individual. And the reason that I've studied him a lot is because his soul somehow or other made the choice to come back onto this planet and manifest a purely evil lifetime. Now, why would a soul do that? Is the question I've asked myself. And the results of World War II are pretty amazing. First of all, the millions and millions of people who were killed in the death camps that the Nazis ran.
Yes.
If you pay attention to birth rates after before World War II was even over, in like 44 and 45, the baby boom started, and after World War II, it just exploded. The interesting thing is that those individuals who were born after World War II, when I look at the scheme of things, it seems to me that a lot of those souls kind of skipped a waiting period, and the individuals who passed in World War II came back almost immediately. And why I think this is true is because if you look then from the 45, which is, we'll call it the start of the baby boom, to 1965, when those kids would have been 20 and 18, 19, and 20 as they're born into the 50s, that's when the peace movement started. The anti-war, the anti-Vietnam, all those souls who were annihilated in World War II came back with a purpose, and that purpose was peace. And they manifested it as these young people, anti-war, the peace symbol.
Well, I mean, that was happening in America, but that wasn't necessarily a worldwide trend.
I can speak to America because I'm American. I'm not looking at this globally, although my sense is that the individuals who propagated the wars were not baby boomers, were not people who passed in the wars. In fact, George H.W. Bush was one of the people. The first Gulf War was a product of his, and a lot of the world leaders at that stage were not. They may have participated in World War II, but although the second George kind of managed not to. The upshot is that the individuals who participated at a soul level in the horror of World War II came back with a determination to bring peace onto the planet. And I think we're seeing that right into this century, right into this millennium, that there are individuals whose goal, who have set themselves the task of bringing peace, proposing peace, rather than, and when you look at the Ukraine, for example, and what's going on in Iraq right now,
the Gaza Strip,
and the Gaza Strip, those are little isolated things, and if they can be tamped down and resolved in some manner, which everyone is working towards. I think back in the 40s and maybe even in the 50s, that would have come up to a terrible conflagration. Everybody would have been pulled in.
That's very true.
And people are working to not let that happen.
Particularly the Gaza Strip, I think, is something that would have set the entire world ablaze. Actually,
Ukraine too.
The shooting down of the Malaysian airliner, I think, had that happened back in the 40s, would have been the spark that ignited the world. A civilian aircraft being shot down over an area that's not technically at war. So it wasn't
that
even
was the Ukraine. Yes,
zone.
Exactly.
And it gets shot down. That would have definitely been. I mean, what was World War I? Was some guy got shot in a car? Like I know.
Well, he was a royal.
I know he was a royal, but like if a war can start over that, I'm pretty sure a civilian aircraft getting shot down would have ignited the world.
But the international community came together to prevent that from happening.
Right.
It's, I think, a direct result of what happened in World War II, and that goes, as to take this all the way back to where this part of the conversation started, to Adolf Hitler.
Well, and that also comes back to like FDR and Eisenhower post-war doing things like the League of Nations that eventually became like the United Nations, where we as these varying countries are going to organize and come together to make sure this kind of thing doesn't pop up again. Because what happened with World War II was we let Germany get a foothold in Belgium, and we let them do a couple
And Russia's
things,
trying to
and-
do it right now, and the Ukraine is like, we draw
Exactly.
the line at the Ukraine. You cannot do this.
Yep.
And my sense and my hope is that, in fact, Adolf Hitler and his minions taught the globe, the entire globe,
Right.
a magnificent lesson.
I would hope so, because history does tend to repeat itself.
Until you learn the lesson.
Exactly.
Absolutely. You get the same lesson over and over and over again until you finally, figure it out.
Well, humanity, we pretty much like to ignore lessons. We pretty much like to look at the past and go, that was them. That won't happen to us now.
I suspect that what you're saying particularly was true in the past. In what's going on right now, what with social media, what with the internet, what with the ability to connect in such an immediate fashion.
Podcasts.
Exactly. That the ability to get the lesson is much more likely to happen now.
Okay.
Things can't get swept under the rug anymore. You can't ignore things anymore. People won't let you.
Okay.
And that's part, to bring this all the way back
Right.
to where
Bring
we
it full
started,
circle.
is part of why Sacred Journey is so important for us.
Yes.
Because it's what we want to do is establish a spiritual community that can go anywhere. It doesn't matter, because it's always going to take them back to New York.
Right. Okay. Well, so I have a couple other questions I wanted to ask you, if you don't mind. If
No,
you don't have
absolutely
anything. All right. And that's first one's about the tarot cards.
Uh-huh.
Now, I think that people have seen tarot cards variously kind of flying around all over the place. And when I was doing a lot of research on it, I found that there are tons of different decks of tarot cards. Is there one specific one that you use?
Well, you see that box there in the corner?
Okay.
That's full of tarot decks.
Okay.
I have this little deck right here. I call this my teeny tiny tarot.
Okay.
This when I go out to lunch, for example, I take this with me, and sometimes I'll be reading for friends. But I do have a favorite deck, and a
Yes.
lot of my students are using this deck.
Okay.
It's the author is Cyril Marchetti. He's a fabulous artist, and the artwork on it is particularly strong for the 21st century, because older tarot decks tended to be very male-centric,
Okay.
because that was where people were in the
Right.
late 18th and 19th and the 20th centuries. And what Cyril has done has brought into balance the masculine and the feminine in very, very positive ways. What I'm
Okay.
looking for is one of the knights to show you why that is.
Yeah, I was actually reading about one where they had taken and feminized all of the cards.
Oh, and there are decks of cats.
Yes.
So there
yeah, I
are
read there was
decks
a deck of baseball.
There's a deck of the Lord of the Rings.
Does it make a difference?
No.
No. Okay.
It makes a difference for the reader, because certain symbols can allow the reader to access information in a way that is not apparent. This card is a knight card, and all of Cyril's knights look like this. And the reason why, when you learn the tarot, it's like learning a new language. So one of the things about knights are that they're in service to humanity. And Cyril Marchetti's thinking on this is that both men and women can be of service to humanity. So he doesn't put a man or a woman in the helmet, because anybody truly can be a knight. Knights have specific characteristics. They ride in, metaphorically. They rescue the maiden in the tower. They slay the dragon, and then they ride away.
Okay.
So when a knight card comes up in a reading, it's important to note that probably help is on the way if a person is asked a question about an issue that they're having trouble with.
Okay.
It may also mean that the person should be the knight and go in and help someone else out. And the interesting thing about being in service is firemen are in service,
Right.
priests are in service, the people in the service are in service. So there's lots of different ways one can be a knight. And one doesn't have to be a man or a woman. One merely has to have the desire to be of service to humanity, because
Right.
that's the knight's role. And so no matter what deck you get, if you have the cat deck and you have a little cat knight there,
Yeah.
you still have to know the meaning of a knight in order to interpret the card in the spread.
Okay. Now, I was also reading too about there's the major and the minor arcana,
Mhm.
and I was reading that the major is essentially like the face cards.
No,
Is that right?
no.
Okay.
The face cards. Okay, you know what a regular deck of cards is like. There's 52
Yes,
cards.
yes, because these were playing cards before they were
No,
used
the other
for
way
Divinity.
around.
They were, okay.
The other way around.
Okay.
The cards we use as playing cards evolved from the lower or the minor arcana.
Okay.
But the tarot cards came first,
Okay.
and there's in the lower arcana, there's the ace or 1 up till 10, and then there's the page, the knight, the queen, and the king, and those are called the court cards.
Okay.
And in our regular playing cards, the page and the knight kind of morphed into the jack.
Okay.
So there's Jack, Queen, King in our playing cards today, whereas in the tarot it began as the page, the knight, the queen, the king. Those are the lower arcana.
Okay.
And then the major arcana, and the lower arcana has to do with the physical realm.
Okay.
It's much more. That happens all the time, Kathy, not to worry about. My brother Joe knocks it down every day. The lower arcana is very much about the physical realm. The
Right.
major arcana, I pull it, and here's a court card just to show you an example of a court card. There's a king.
Okay.
The major arcana is about the spiritual realm. And the hermit is one of the spiritual realm. The tower is one of the spiritual realm. And those are more likely to represent something in the energetic as opposed to the physical. They may also tell us where the person, the querent, is in their lives with regard to the question that was asked.
Okay.
You can't just look at a card and say it means this or it means that. It's all in relationship to the person asking the question, to the question that was asked, and to the position of the card in the spread. And I have a book in the other room with maybe 150 different spreads.
Right.
That's why it takes years to really learn the tarot.
Now, is there a set number? Because I had said that most tarot cards, I believe, was 48 to a deck, or no,
76.
76. Oh,
There's
okay.
a 78 now. Now you have me.
78 now.
78 now? Okay, so there is a specific number that's supposed to be in the deck. Do you use both the major and the minor to read? Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So you do need to, you can't give just a spiritual or a physical reading.
Well,
have to
you
read.
could, but it wouldn't be very balanced.
It wouldn't be a complete reading.
Right,
Okay.
exactly.
And there was again, is it the Thoth, the Thoth?
Oh, that's just the
It's a specific
deck.
kind
a
of
specific deck.
That had, I guess, this is the most criticized of the decks.
Well, one needs to have perspective about this. That particular deck is a product of the generation in which it was made
Okay.
and designed, and many of the symbols of the tarot.
Why is it, I don't know why it's being criticized. I just read that this is like the controversial deck, I guess, and I don't
Okay.
know why.
Let me give you one word:
Okay.
fear.
Okay. Again, coming back to that.
There are people who are afraid of it. It's a deck of cards.
Right.
And it has symbols on it that were interpreted a specific way at a specific time. My sense is it's no longer relevant to us in this century, in this millennium. However, it doesn't mean it's invalid. There are aspects of it that have moved into the tarot as it exists now. The Rider-Waite is like the grandfather, the great-grandfather of most decks, and the symbolism in the Rider-Waite deck has carried now well past 100 years and even in the Lord of the Rings tarot,
Yeah.
the design of the cards and all of the other decks that have morphed out of the original decks, all you can find a link right back to Rider-Waite. And Rider-Waite's
Which is a big name I
symbolism.
was seeing mentioned.
Yes, of course. The tarot itself goes back into the 13th and 14th centuries.
Okay.
One good example of this, there's a card in a tarot deck. In this deck right here, it's called Faith. In most decks, it's called the Hierophant. However, it originated as Il Papa because back in probably the 14th or 15th century, when the tarot was being used, the Catholic Church was very against the tarot.
Okay.
What else?
Right.
So what the individuals who devised the tarot and used it did was they created a card and they called it Il Papa, the Pope,
Right.
to kind of appease that fear from the Catholic Church.
Okay.
And over the centuries, it evolved and became the Hierophant.
Okay.
And now in modern decks, like in this deck right here, the Cyril Marchetti deck, he refers to it as the Faith card. And on it, he has a picture of the Pope, a picture of the Dalai Lama. I'm trying to remember the other two. But four spiritual leaders from four different religions.
Because it doesn't necessarily have to do with anyone in particular. It has to do with the idea of faith.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
And numerology. Now, numerology, again, is really interesting to me because, again, very numbers and math-oriented kind of guy. So the idea that, again, everything can come back to numbers is very interesting. Now, what I was reading was most people read numerology on single-digit.
Oh, always.
level.
You always reduce to one number.
Okay, because I was reading that some people have expanded to a 2-digit.
Well, there are 3 numbers that are called master numbers.
Okay.
11, 22, and 33 are the master numbers, and they represent the advanced, if you will, powers of 2, 4, and 6. 11 being a 2, 22 being a 4, and 33 being a 6. The number 2 is about balance. If you think of a table with 2 legs, it's not going to stand up.
Okay.
It's out of balance.
Right.
So the number 11 is the master number of balance. It means that the concept of being in balance has been mastered. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, just
11. Yeah,
that was
see,
my soccer number.
master number of balance. The number 4 is a number of no movement, no action, but it's also the number of a building block. It's very solid. It's a foundational number. So the number 22, which is for advanced, is the master builder. This is the person who has their act together and can construct and build things. And not necessarily physical things. Could be energetic things. Could be the creation of, it's a creator, it's a builder, they're the master builder. And then the number 6 is the teaching number. So the number 33, which is 3 and 3 is 6, is the master teacher.
Now, where do these numbers come from? Like, as far as if you're trying to get some numerology to, like, get a read on people, like you said, the builder, where would you get those numbers from?
Their name and their birth date.
Okay. So is that the part of the arithmancy, I guess, which is the manipulation of the numbers to get it down to a single digit? Is that an art form in itself,
Okay,
I would imagine?
what's your birthday?
July 29th, 1988.
Okay, just write 7, 29, 19 what?
88.
1988. So then, here's another 11 right here. 2 and 9 are 11. So you were born on an 11 day. So
Okay.
11 obviously it has meaning for you. And so we've got 7 and 11 is 18. Here, I'm just going to take your
No
pencil
problem.
and
You
do
can
this.
go ahead and do whatever.
So like this, we go like this. And
Okay.
so 7, 8, 9, and 9 are 18, and 1 and 8 are 9. So, or you could go 29, 36, 3 and 6 are 9.
Okay.
1988, 1 and 9 are 10, 18 and 8 are 26. 2 and 6 are 8. Okay, so then you add these two together, 9 and 8 are 17, and that equals an 8. So you've got a very interesting life here. This is your life path number from your birth date, and 8 is the karmic number and the money number. So issues around all of those.
I'm assuming it's karmic because the money certainly hasn't come around.
Well, and look here, at the end of your birth date, you have 88. So the number 8 is very important for you. Now, I'm not going to do your name, but if we did your name, then we would do
See,
this.
it's always crazy how it always comes back to the patterns like that. That's why I love math.
It's
Numbers
very
always come back to
interesting.
patterns.
So here this is kind of sometimes called the magic square. It has a lot of different names. But what we would do is we would take your name and your birth date, and we'd start adding. Well, let's see, you've got 1 7, you've got a 2, you've got a 9, you've got a 1, you've got another 9, and you've got 2 8s. So just in your birth date, you're missing some numbers, but you have to put your name in here too.
Okay.
And then you see which numbers you have a lot of, and that means you're very accomplished in those areas.
Okay.
And then we look at areas where there aren't any, and those are areas where you're going to have lessons in this lifetime.
Okay.
Okay, that quickie. I mean,
okay.
there's all kinds of other things you can do with numbers. One of the things that I do, I have clients who work in real estate, and one of my clients flips houses.
Okay.
And so he'll send me the address. And I don't need the name, I just ask for the number. And from the number, I can tell what's going on at that house, whether it's going to be easy to resell, if there's issues going on that are not apparent right away.
Mm-hmm.
And I never tell my clients what to do. I give them information so that they can make wise choices. So I
Right.
give all the information that I can about what those numbers reveal about that address, and then allow the person to make the decision of whether or not they want to deal with that energy.
Okay.
It's that simple.
All right. Well, was there anything else you guys wanted to maybe plug in here or talk
Kathy?
about?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
You're good? All right.
Okay. She didn't mention her crystal heart, but that might be another podcast. You maybe want to do it with
yeah,
her.
I mean, obviously, we are at, right now, about an hour and a half. But there was like 10 minutes there at the beginning where I was testing and stuff that'll get cut out. And honestly, one of the great things about doing a podcast, it doesn't matter how long it is. If it's an hour and a half long, people are going to listen to it, whether it's half an hour,
Well,
an
we
hour,
hope
an
so.
hour and a half. They'll listen to it because they want to listen to it. They're not going to be disinterested at an hour in and turn it off, because if they were interested up to an hour, they're going to be interested for that extra half hour that's in there too. You know what I mean? It doesn't really matter. We don't need to fit in like a time slot on TV or anything like that.
Well,
But-
it's interesting because I could sit here and tell you story after story about things that
Right.
happened in readings, things that happened in when I read for animals. We never even got into talking about animals and reading
geez.
animals and
Yeah,
and
see,
that kind of thing.
absolutely. And this is definitely, I would love to do many more recordings with you.
Well,
as
it'd be
many as
interesting
you
to
guys
see-
are willing to do.
Yeah, I do energy work with animals, so it's amazing.
Yeah.
Their connection with me.
Okay.
Mhm.
So I guess what we're saying is that you'd certainly be welcome to even have a regular show.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Let's see where this goes.
Definitely thank you guys for having me out. And the website is at journeyintopower.com. That's right. And if they wanted to get a hold of you, they find you on that website.